Well, so as you guys know, we've been talking a lot about like case studies and stuff in class, and I just want to bring this case study today and kind of analyze from a different aspect outside of skiing and snowboarding or hiking how an avalanche can affect a group of riders from both various ages and experiences. I give you guys 2 handouts to look over. You can kind of see some of the details, but I also wrote some of the details up here. So it was on January 5th, so it wasn't too long ago, in South Waldron Creek, Montana. 2 snowmobilers were caught, one buried and killed, and one was buried and injured. It was a hard slab. It was an R4, so relativity to this path size is pretty big on the face. And then the amount of force was big enough to crush houses and take out trees and stuff like that. The slope aspect was east, which is interesting, but it was also at 37 degrees, and I know Montana degree slope angle is a little bit different than Colorado. I was not able to look at that, but in Colorado, by Colorado standards, that is getting up into the danger zone, and it was at 7,000 feet, which is a little low, but on average, it's pretty good. It was in the trees, just above tree line, actually. So the avalanche info is about 12 to 60 inches in the crown, so it means the crown varied a ton throughout its fracture point or the trigger point, and is pretty deep, all the way from 60 to obviously 12 inches, which isn't too bad. And it was 1,700 feet across, which is awfully big. The weather summary prior to that, there was a lot of weak snowpack during the early season. Montana wasn't really getting a lot of snow, but what snow they were getting was followed up by rain at high elevations, which is seen. I guess I didn't put that on there. So they did ended up getting rain though at about 8,000 feet in the area, which like faceted everything and put a solid crust on top. Weather during and prior to the accident was warm. The temperature's at 35 degrees for the high and 23 for the low at the station, which was about 1.5 miles from the actual site and about 1,000 feet lower, more or less. Overall, the Snowtail site had 0.2 inches the prior about 2 days-ish, and that was at 6,400 feet, and then the report says that at 7,000 feet, or 7,800 feet, it could have been a little bit more, but it was not much. Had strong southwesterly winds during December, which occurred with 15 to 20 mile per hour and 30 to 50 mile per hour gusts, which died down at the end of December and turned north, which, as I was looking at it, the avalanche occurred on the east-facing slopes, meaning that all the winds coming from the southwest-facing slopes over, and including when it switched on December 30th from the north, had a lot of snow accumulation on those eastern slopes where the avalanche occurred, and less on the leeward side where it came off. Hence those large wind drifts and snow accumulation on the leeward eastern southern slopes. The snowpack conditions at the time, October and November began snow accumulation followed by rain at 8,000 feet, which crusted all of the snow that had landed, and was followed up by snowfall pretty quick, so it automatically started to make weak layers on top of that crust. It ended up faceting and created a deep depth core underneath the crust due to dry and cold weather. So between the rain, the light snow, and then the depth core from the drying and the cold weather, like the snow levels were automatically kind of dooming themselves to be pretty weak. And there was actually not that much snow in the basin itself. Now on the report, if you guys want to kind of look at it, you can see that there were 4 riders, each of different skill set and age. So there was one rider who's 33 years old, and one rider who's pretty skilled, one rider 66 years old, second rider is 11 years old, and then there was a very beginner rider who's probably, I think it says in his 20s. Should say in the the 4th rider, I think it says in the report at the very bottom. 35. So the 4th rider is less experienced, and then they had an 11-year-old. And based off the information, part of the group had gear and part of the group did not have proper gear. I think recall the Rider the 11-year-old is not carrying rescue gear. 2 and 3 carried snow shovels but no probes, and they didn't expect avalanche danger because the bull was, 1, had little amount of snow, and 2, they thought that they had a lot of experience in that bull. They've been in that bull a lot, so they've realized that their experience would dictate how things would go, and they thought everything would be fine. Turns out, Rider 3 ended up, Rider 1 actually was on top of the crest where it happened, and it broke off, and Rider 4, who had just come up through the meadow, was sitting at the bottom. I think it was Rider 3.
Yeah, 1 and 4.
Yeah, 1 and 4. So 4 was sitting at the bottom, and the avalanche actually came down and took him out. He was not on his sled, and he was not riding. He ended up trying to take a few steps to outrun it, and Rider 1 was coming down the slope as this was happening, and as Rider 1 took off, he ended up getting overtaken as well, but he managed to stay on top of the snow. But the 4th rider ended up being buried 2 to 3 feet. In the accident summary, he was not found until the next day, I believe. But
It didn't say it was the next day because they gave him CPR.
they did. Oh, that's right. Sorry, that's a different one. So yeah, they ended up giving him CPR. He did not survive. But one thing I wanted to ask you guys was, throughout this situation, based off of what you can see, like based off of what we've been learning in the prepare, plan, ride, and debrief, how did they prepare for the day of riding as a group, based off of the age differences, in your guys' opinion?
Yeah, they didn't really do that well.
No, because they went in with half gear for everyone, not enough rescue gear. They went in expecting conditions to be okay because the snow levels were not as high as they normally are, and they had experience in the basin, so they figured they knew the slope angles. And their experience and age skills vary wide. I mean, you went from a 66-year-old to an 11-year-old, which, as we were learning earlier, like preferences, competence, and being everyone on the same page, that group dynamic was greatly either fractured or not even there in the first place. They were just planning to go out and have fun and had no intentions of any path finding or any pathfinding or any like actual plan. They're just riding up and down the basin, having a fun time. And the next thing is, did they plan very well for this trip in general? Did they plan a good route? I mean, if you read the report, it says they just kind of went straight up the basin and kind of went back down, played around in the meadow below, which it does. The basin did end up coming down. It was very steep and it ended up coming down to a flat part, so it did keep it from like, they were safe at the bottom, but in the climbs and stuff, they probably were hitting a lot of trigger points and a lot of weak points in the snow based off of those weak layers in the prior months. One thing they did do well is the emergency plan. How do you guys think they did well in that from what you read after the avalanche occurred?
They turned on their like transceivers to try to find the guy's beacon, beacon, but he didn't have one.
Right.
So they called 911, and then like just were digging around because they didn't have probes.
Right.
So they were trying to do what they could with what they had.
Right. Yeah, they had some of the necessary gear, but the one thing they didn't do is they didn't double check that everyone had the same necessary gear, so for in case it were to happen to anyone. One thing I wanted to ask was it a good group to be out there in those conditions and in that situation? Based on, I mean, the competency levels of everyone seem to be pretty off.
And not with the communication that they had with each other.
I mean, the group had a lot of experience. I mean, it said that Rider 2 was a part of a search and rescue team, and then I think Rider 1 was had some experience, I think, in like some kind of rescue thing as well.
Right.
So
So they did, and they also experienced. They had. It also says in the report they had light first aid training or light avalanche training, which helped in their situation to be able to quickly pull out their probes and quickly get the transceiver like to search mode. But the one thing I think they lacked the most in this situation was just overall planning, especially even with their skills and knowledge. It didn't seem like they were all on the same page. They just kind of were out there just willy-nilly having fun. And how did they ride during this situation? And what did they execute well and not execute well, both prior to, during, and after the avalanche? In your guys' opinion. What did the group do well once the avalanche occurred even as well?
Well, Rider 4 did not know what was going on. He was like looking off, doing something, had no idea that there was even an avalanche, so he was definitely not aware of his surroundings and what was going on. Rider 1 was the one that set off the avalanche, and he was trying to get away from it by driving ahead of it and like trying to motion to Rider 4, but that didn't work. So communication was just completely off. Like they had no anticipate the hazard or anything like that, and they just kind of did it and had to deal with it.
Right. Yeah, it's good. Yeah, they definitely, their experience helped, but they didn't have a lot of pre-planning. During, they were kind of doing whatever they wanted. They'd have a little bit of communication between Rider 1 and Rider 4 when he came up through the trailhead, but once in the basin, they kind of lost communication, and that's when the avalanche occurred. And then after the avalanche, they had enough sense to go up and call 911 and get emergency personnel out there and search and rescue, but then they also had the same amount of sense to go down and start probing and searching as well. But it seems like as well with the one thing they lacked is because everyone's not the same age, it was hard to get everyone probably to do the same thing in that moment. It was probably pretty intense, if I had to guess. Yeah, pretty sad story overall. Kind of crazy that can happen to snowmobilers. But it also just shows that, like what we've been learning, especially like today, learning about pre-planning and make sure everyone's on the right mindset and everyone's on the same page, and competency levels and such things like that played a significant role in this case. But also shows that you have to be prepared in the cases where you think there's least likely anything to happen. So that's about it. And that concludes that. And I had a YouTube video, but we kind of covered everything on that as well. So thank you.